the Culinary Saijiki podcast. My name is Allison Whipple, and twice a month I'll bring you a conversation with a fellow haiku practitioner about the way that food and the seasons show up in their haiku practice. Visit www.culinarysaijiki.com to listen to the podcast, read long-form essays on these topics, and sign up to join the podcast conversation. You can also support the project at buymeacoffee.com/culinarysaijiki. Enjoy the show. All right, welcome to episode 5 of the Culinary Saijiki podcast. And my guest today is Lorraine Padden. But before that, my usual housekeeping announcements. Over on the blog, last week I did a long post on food Kigo related to the American Southwest. That was a pretty involved, I thought it was going to be a really easy essay to write, and it was really challenging, but I had a lot of fun. And I would love to do more region-specific food Kigo, not just from the United States, but from all over the world. So if there's an area that's your specialty and you'd be interested in doing a guest post, please reach out. I would love to talk that over more. Remember that August 30th, we have a bonus episode. It's a community open mic, and the deadline to send haiku for that, you're going to send an audio file. That deadline is August 28th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. You'll do that with an audio link, and that link will be in the show notes along with the rest of the guidelines. But basically, 1 to 2 haiku. There is a food connection related to autumn, and please say your name or pen name. Either is fine, and if you're comfortable, where you are writing from. Thanks also to our most recent anonymous donor who bought 3 coffees. I know who you are, but I know you prefer to remain anonymous, but just so you know, I was super grateful for that. You can also support financially all of you listeners by going to buymeacoffee.com/culinarysaijiki. And, you know, if you don't have the funds, you can also support the podcast just by sharing episodes you like. That would, honestly, spreading the word of mouth, that's always a great feeling. I love to know when episodes resonate. All right, in podcast news, this talk with Lorraine was my first long distance, well, it was my second long distance recording, but since Lorraine had scheduled with me first, I put this podcast first, but this was one of 2 initial online recordings I did. I actually went with Zencastr, gave that a try, and was a big fan. So if you are an aspiring podcaster looking to have internet conversations, or you're just not thrilled with Zoom, I would say give Zencastr a shot. I'm pretty pleased with it. We also finally have a set theme song after, you know, several weeks of trying things and it not working out. The song is a public domain recording by Django Reinhardt called J'attendrai. J'attendrai. My French is terrible. But it was recorded at the Cleveland Music Hall in 1939. And for those of you who didn't know, I did grow up in Cleveland, and I'd always wanted something that when I was looking for other music, I wanted something that sounded like Django Reinhardt, and I'm happy to just have found a good quality recording of his to use. His music reminds me of my musician grandfather, and that all connects to food for me as well. So thanks to my partner John for helping me wade through the confusing labyrinth that is public domain music and all of this stuff out there to help me find something I liked, because that was overwhelming. But anyway, enough about that. I had a wonderful time talking to Lorraine a couple of Saturdays ago. I really have been admiring her work for a while. I know I said that at the end of the previous episode, but I've seen her stuff in various online and print haiku publications, and so I was so excited when she was the first person who was not a person I'd already met who wanted to be on the show. So I hope you enjoy our talk as much as I enjoyed recording it. All right, we are rolling. Lorraine Padden is a Haiku Foundation Touchstone Award nominated poet whose work appears in Modern Haiku, The Heron's Nest, Tiny Words, and Frog Pond, among other notable journals. She won Tricycle Magazine's 2021 Best of the Haiku Challenge and received an honorable mention in the 2021 annual Haiku Society of America Renge competition. Ms. Padden's 2022 awards include honorable mentions in the International Modern Kigo competition and a Pine Song Award for her winning haiku in the North Carolina Poetry Society's Bloodroot Haiku competition. Her first poetry collection will be published by Red Moon Press this summer, and that is called Upwelling. And you can find more at lorrainepadden.com, which will, of course, be in the show notes. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's just a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
I'm so excited to have you here as well. So do you want to just launch into your first two haiku?
Sure. Okay, here we go. Julienne Carrots, How French Translations Upgrade Our Expectations. Julienne Carrots, How French Translations Upgrade Our Expectations. And the second one, Charcuterie Chess, The Prosciutto Checkmate. Charcuterie Chess, The Prosciutto Checkmate.
Thank you. And when I'm grouping haiku together, I always I group them in ways that they make sense to me and they wouldn't necessarily make sense to anyone else. But I grouped these two because they are, although written in English, they both incorporate non-English words. And I just, so I'm like, well, they go together. That's because, again, that's the way my brain works.
That totally works.
Yeah. I really responded to the Julienne Carrots one because my partner's sister is a trained pastry chef, and which isn't quite the same as cutting carrots, but one of the things that I've really gotten clued into is how much of the culinary language that we use in English really is actually just from the French, and we just have all of these basically loan words in English that really are French, and that's sort of the way so much of our language for at least cooking, which is fascinating to me. So I was interested in these in particular because of the way you bring language in, and how does the language of cooking or the language of food in particular, how do you feel that really shows up in your poetry?
Oh, what a great question. With these two, perhaps the first one, Julienne Carrots, I remember watching and reading about Julia Child and how sort of her spin on cooking really influenced American cuisine and American cooking styles. For the second, I lived in Italy for a time, and prosciutto is just one of those,
Mm-hmm.
one of those ingredients that, for me, it's sort of the charcuterie chess. It's this play between, well, which is the better, tastier, more interesting sausage there. But it's sort of the broader lens through which I view food is usually about how it relates to humans, the gathering around a table to share a meal, the relationships we have with each other that are then mirrored somehow in the food itself. And I find myself really drawn to, I'm not sure if it's personification or anthropomorphic shifting of food into more of an active agent in the haiku, or perhaps the senryu itself. So,
and that's sending me down this like this sort of associative path of thinking about prosciutto in general. And so my mom's family is all Italian, but at the same time, like, you know, we lived in Ohio in the suburbs, where just, you know, a lot of really traditional historical ingredients weren't available. So
right.
spaghetti carbonara is like one of my most favorite foods in the world. And I was I was in my 20s before I realized that it's not made with bacon. Like
Yeah.
that's just what was that's and you know that there's so much of food culture that is you make do with what's around, but no, it's not bacon, it's not ham, it's
Yeah.
um
Etc.
ideally it's guanciale, but that's really hard to get. So, it's just sort of like prosciutto is the default. Um and so how much of um I was actually I recorded with someone else yesterday evening, and we were talking about how in these short poems, like you can get something out of them, but sometimes to like you can there are deeper layers, but those rest on shared understanding of things that not everyone can have. And I'm
Oh,
sort of thinking
absolutely.
about like the different kinds of cured meats are like a shared understanding that not everyone can have. Like even if your family's Italian, you might get to your
True.
20s and not have ever known what
Yeah.
prosciutto was.
I did not know really until college.
Yeah,
So yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
No, it is fascinating to me the way that ingredients are um they are so specific, and yet in many ways they can be um really unknowable to people.
Yes, they
Yeah.
could be mysterious, they can have their own agency, they can play a role in the poem that's very proactive and not just a garnish, if you will. Pardon that pun. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I find a lot of as I said, a lot of really human characteristics show up in some of my work that I write around food.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Eating is a pretty universal experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And really, I hadn't really explored it much, except in the last couple of years. I dip in and out of an online community led by Clark Strand, who writes and teaches a lot of
Yeah.
575 poetry. And so the Julian Carrots poem is a 575. And usually, what I do is I take a very both and approach
Mhm.
to haiku. I write a lot in both the strict syllable structure, the more traditional format, and much more informally as well. And one kind of feeds the other. That I found. Um, and so the carrots was a challenge word or a prompt.
Mhm.
So from there, some of these other poems also came out of this similar prompt situations. But I hadn't really thought of food as being this genre that could really fuel an interesting content and material for haiku expression. So I think it's just fabulous.
I didn't even realize that was the Julian Carrots was a 575. I just didn't it was so it just felt so right the way it was that like
Yeah,
it didn't
a
stick
lot, a
out.
lot of what I write, I then distill down
Mhm.
to something a little more succinct. Take out the prepositions and the articles and
Yeah.
things, and um, I find that those poems more readily get picked up by journals than the 575. Although Mainichi newspaper in Japan, Asahi Shimbun's network, there are journals out there in other parts of the world that millions of people read on a daily basis, and they all have traditional haiku in them. So
Yeah.
it's a really interesting both and situation, I think.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like thinking of it as a both and because I'm certainly not opposed to 575. I think the one thing who was it? Oh, Stanford Forrester on the Kerouac episode workshop for haiku piece said, if you can write a 575 and it feels completely, I'm butchering what he said. If you can write a 575 that feels, completely natural, God bless you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It usually feels a little freighted with some extra bits just trying to make a syllable count.
Yeah. And so that's a thing I used to do 575 all the time. I mean, that's how so
Well,
many of us were taught,
right?
right?
Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
but it's gotten to a point as I've worked with other people that like again, always in favor of it. I certainly still write them, but I feel like I can really hear it when it's like, we gotta cram this extra syllable in to make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
To me, that actually didn't create any distance. Again, I pictured something that is not the real scenario
Right.
necessarily. But maybe it's not too far off. When I read it, I pictured a sister or a cousin or a close friend, and the speaker of the poem observing it, maybe observing it from a distance, but still observing it in some sort of quasi intimate way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Who thought that writing in three tiny lines could just bring up
Oh my
so
goodness.
many concerns?
So true. So very true.
I will, since this is about food, and I always like to ask sort of funny questions. What is your favorite dip for celery?
Oh gosh, probably like a really yummy ranch dressing, or maybe like a sour cream and oniony thing. Yeah, definitely. If I feel like I can't quite justify the potato chips and the sour cream and onion, which is my true favorite, I'll say, "Oh, well, I'm being a little healthy, and I'm going to use celery instead." So,
Oh, chips and a French onion dip is my greatest weakness.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
I love ranch, and like being a Midwesterner, like we are known for loving ranch, but like it's so interesting to me that that is marketed as a salad dressing. So to me, I'm like, that's not a salad dressing. That is a dip.
that is that is a spoonful situation for me, for sure.
Yeah, and to me, there's a fundamental difference between a dressing and a dip. Although I grew up with what was it, Miracle Whip salad dressing, and as a child, I was always like,
Absolutely.
what is this?
We had my mother. We had a bar, a solid bar of Velveeta cheese in the refrigerator all the time. And of course, my mother and father were sort of World War II generation. So at that time, you bought it in a wooden box, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
was, we used to get it in cardboard, but that's how it started. And that thing would just be in there for months. She'd cut some off it and melt it, and we'd have it over broccoli, or just cut into pieces or stirred into eggs, what have you. But it was like this one of the prime staples in the refrigerator.
I remember my grandmother would always talk about oleo, something I have personally never witnessed, but how it was like this gray block and you had to mix the colored powder in.
Yes, I've heard of that as well. I cannot imagine. Yeah, to make it seem kind of like fake margarine stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, definitions of salad dressing, because to me, salad dressing was like 7 C's, bottled Italian dressing,
Really?
or it was the vinaigrette that my grandfather would come over, and it wasn't even a vinaigrette. He would just toss some things. To
Oh,
me, this is how I remember it: is he didn't even taste anything. He just made a red wine vinaigrette that, as a 6-year old, I didn't love, but I ate because you ate
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
And now, of course, I'm like, oh, I would kill to be able to have my grandfather come and
I know.
dress the salad
Yeah,
again.
I know.
Yeah, but all right. Do you want to read three and or wait? We're on part three.
Okay. Sweating the onions, first date. Sweating the onions, first date. That's a one liner. And then there's his dark orange cologne, a pumpkin in the oven. His dark orange cologne, a pumpkin in the oven. Um, and so for the first one, I was thinking, gosh, if you're sweating and you're nervous and you had onions for lunch, you're at a date later. Oh my goodness, that could be that would be something that would cross my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think onions do kind of, if you cut them or you chop them and leave them, they do leak a little liquid. They do sweat a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what was going on there. And for the other one, dark orange cologne, I was trying to do something with the maybe a little bit of synesthesia, the scent, maybe making that also a person as well as the pumpkin in the oven or the dark orange color also having a fragrance, that sort of thing.
The sweating onions one, I took a slightly different interpretation of it, and I think this brings me back to one of the things that I love so much about haiku, and this is true with all poetry, is the reader is always going to bring their own experience, but
For sure.
especially with haiku being so brief and in the moment, that moment can just relate to something so incredibly personal. But
Hmm.
so this was not a first date. My partner had been seeing each other for almost a year, and but we'd mostly hung out at his, like, and I'd never we'd been together for almost a year. I hadn't, like, cooked anything for him. I can cook, I just, didn't. And I was like, "You should come over, for a nice dinner. I'll cook us a nice dinner." And knowing that French onion soup was his favorite soup, decided to make it, not ever having made it before.
Oh, that's very courageous. I love that.
Have you ever made French onion soup from
No,
scratch?
I have not.
You are slow cooking onions for a while,
Wow.
like, on very low heat,
Mhm.
for, I don't know, 2 hours. I don't know how much it is. It's something like 2 hours.
Wow.
Um, and my I had a housemate at the time, and he came in and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm making French onion soup for John." And he goes, "What, is it his birthday or something?" And then that's when I was like, "Oh, I made a weird choice."
Oh, how did it come out?
Edible but not memorable.
Oh,
But I have since then upped my French onion soup game. I only make it about once a year because it's
it's
kind of a project.
yes, it is
Um, but yeah, I
awesome.
didn't even know you were supposed to, melt Gruyere on it, and so I had a special order oven safe bowls from Amazon Prime Now
Yeah.
for
Wow.
this dinner.
Yeah. Oh my
So the second I saw that poem, even though it was not about a first date, I'm like, oh, I know this person. This person is trying to impress someone and has
oh,
taken on a task that they cannot hope to live up to.
that is awesome. Good for you for trying it. I'm very intimidated by onions myself.
It's actually like, now French onion soup. After I did it the first time, and it turned out edible. Since it's if you have a whole afternoon to sit there and poke at onions on a very low heat
Right.
on a stove, it's actually not that hard. It just like many great French things, it takes time and assumes you have servants to cook for you.
There you go. Yeah, there's this wonderful photo of Julia Child taken from the side during the taping of one of her shows, where you saw the side of the counter, and she's standing there, and she'd be looking across the counter to the camera, and behind her there's a stove, and there are at least 8 different people on the ground kneeling around her behind the counter that you can't see from the front. Of course,
Wow.
from the side view, you see all these people crouching there holding a bowl or getting ready to hand her something else so that she could, seamlessly weave this wonderful dish together, whatever she was making. I thought that was just so interesting, literally to see, how the sausage is made or not.
Yeah.
And to see exactly her sort of cadre of helpers that were indispensable. I
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
And that second one, I picked up on the synesthetic aspect of it, um, um, of the orange as a color versus orange as a smell,
Mm,
and then also thinking of, like, if you are baking pumpkin for some reason, um, the smell or baking. I really am more thought of baking the pumpkin seeds, just because, again, that's what I'm more familiar with. But the whole thing, just like, it felt like fall. The whole thing felt like
yeah, and I was also thinking as the pumpkin heats up, maybe something else will heat up with this person with the orange cologne too
absolutely.
over time in the warm kitchen perhaps.
Yeah. No, that I grouped these together because one was, to me, it was like, oh, this is the comical side of human interaction, and then this one's the more sensual side.
Yeah, yeah, could be.
All right. Would you like to read the last
I
two?
want to, sure. Wild mushrooms, the underworld in my kitchen. Wild mushrooms, the underworld in my kitchen. Thanksgiving dinner. Everyone gets to pick a bone. Thanksgiving dinner. Everyone gets to pick a bone. That last one is my favorite food poem that I have written to date.
I think it resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. My sister and I used to fight over the wishbone, and I think that's probably what inspired it. But clearly, it's like this relationship around food, the
Hmm.
people involved, and the situation that lends lends itself to a little bit of humor, but also, what
Yeah.
what so many of us probably experience during holiday dinners
Oh
in
yeah.
one way or another.
In one way or another.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Are you a mushroom forager?
No, I'm not. I live in San Diego, not
Oh
really the climate or the
no.
place to do that. But I grew up in New England, and of course they were everywhere. And
Yeah.
I think I was probably a little spooked in trying because I would have this fear of finding something poisonous and not being able to tell what it was. But
Hmm.
I have lots of friends who routinely forage and come up with some great stuff and make these incredible meals with them. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's my partner has done some light foraging. They have his family has a cabin in Illinois, and there's a stand of porcinis and a stand of chicken in the woods.
Gosh, that's fabulous.
And
That's
for
beautiful.
chicken of the woods is definitely that is absolutely you're like, yep, that is what that is.
Yep.
That is edible. It's great. It's delicious. It doesn't taste like chicken, but when prepared right, it could actually pass for seafood.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It has that kind of like meaty, substantive.
Yeah, it's really meat. He actually, the first time he found one, it was literally this like the size of a dinner plate, and he chicken fried it.
Wow. Oh, wow.
A
That's
chicken fried mushroom.
interesting.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
cool.
Porcini's also pretty easy to tell. Morels pretty easy to tell. So I would encourage people, be careful, but also at least like the big three,
Yeah, you're pretty,
pretty
pretty good.
easy.
Pretty easy. Yeah.
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 But always, double check. My last fall in Austin, a friend of mine had, I don't remember what it was called, but it was like the one edible mushroom that grows in Texas. And a bunch of them had come up in a stump in her yard.
Wow.
Um, and she just let it, she's like, just let us harvest them. And we did a spore test just to,
Just to make
be
sure.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but oh man, it made a really good soup. So,
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And there's something so much more enjoyable about your own stuff, whether you forage for it or you grow it yourself. It's again, is that relationship of not only the food itself, but how it came to be on your plate, how it came to be on
yeah,
your table that really
yeah.
makes such a difference.
Yeah, and it really makes me think about how, you know, mushrooms, I mean, again, mushrooms often get maligned, but also just like how many people just didn't like in the United States, or at least where I was growing up, didn't understand how to work with mushrooms well.
Right.
Like I grew up with plain white raw button mushrooms in a salad as a kid, and I'm like, this is
Exactly.
gross.
Or in we would get them in cans as well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
we would, my mom, if we had a steak or something, my mom would just dump the can into a pan and brown them. But
yeah,
we often didn't even start with the fresh mushrooms because it was just so much easier and less expensive to just buy
yeah,
the can.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
And so for years, I thought mushrooms were disgusting, and then it turns out you shouldn't really be eating them raw in the first place. Like a white button mushroom is not going to kill you if you eat it raw, but
right. But
they're
yeah, the window of fresh mushroom is pretty
yeah,
narrow, I think,
yeah,
to really.
uh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
And it's funny that I this poem underwent so many different versions because I, I was working with sort of the Underground Railroad metaphor for
mm,
a while of this because they had these networks, these mycelial networks are
yeah,
everywhere, and these fungi are just so interconnected. So I
hmm,
was trying to play with that, but eventually I just said, okay, it's underworld because some of them are really deadly and maybe they're scary, and let's just see
hmm,
how that might work in my kitchen. So
yeah. But it also makes me think of the Persephone myth,
mm,
even though it's a pomegranate, right?
I believe
But it's okay. So the underworld is, it's grim and not awesome, and yet also, but Persephone's, there. Like this beautiful person is still in the underworld, and spring is going to come again. So
yeah.
I actually thought you were invoking that myth in a different way.
Oh no, that's great though. Yeah. Yeah, like this promise, this endurance, this return, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this
And they
perseverance.
and they once the mycelium gets established, unless there's some sort of disaster that destroys it. I mean, they'll keep coming back. And, some years they won't be. Like, we have not had a good cache of mushrooms this year because it's been so dry.
Hmm.
But now we did just have a week of torrential rain, so probably if we went out there next weekend, we would just be like flush with
Yeah,
mushrooms.
yeah, yeah.
So if it's dry, they won't necessarily like come back, and like as full as they might, but that doesn't mean they're gone or dead.
Okay, they're just
Um, yeah,
dormant, just waiting for the right condition.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what's your favorite dish at Thanksgiving dinner?
Oh my gosh, probably the turkey and the gravy and the stuffing, like
Mm.
that trio. Yeah, probably the definitely. And then of course you have to have the cranberries with it for that sort of salty sweet combo. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and that, if that's all, I could cut bait on all the vegetables. Don't need anything green on that plate for me.
I am a sides person.
Ah,
So
awesome.
I am really like turkey is great as leftovers, but if I could just fill a plate with sides 2 or 3 times and be totally content. Yeah,
They're usually just like fantastic too. A
yeah,
lot of people just pull out all the stops and they do sides that have 18 ingredients,
yeah.
and they're fabulous.
Mhm,
And because it's that one occasion perhaps in the year where it's okay. Let's
mhm.
let's let's put in those hours, like for that French onion soup, or for these beautiful, delicious sides that just complement the whole
Yeah.
meal. It's this
My partner will, and he does this out of a concession to me. He will make a green bean casserole completely from scratch, including the soup base,
That is awesome
and
with
it is
onions
so
on top.
delicious.
It is. It's wonderful. It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, including frying the onions for the top of it.
That
Like,
that is truly outstanding.
it is truly outstanding. It is heaven.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
could just put the whole dish of that in front of me, and that could be my
And
Thanksgiving.
you're good.
I'd be good.
Yeah. 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 Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Well, we are actually coming close to time where we've almost hit the mark exactly. Love
Okay.
it. Do you have any last thoughts about your haiku process, or about how food comes into that? I know you sort of, our conversation has in many ways touched on that organically, but if you had any last thoughts, I would love to hear them.
Yeah, thank you. No, this is kind of a new branch of the tree, if you will, of content that I'm just still learning how to explore. And because you're immersed in this flavor, if you will, and you put out the call for people to respond to it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I hadn't really, except for a few prompts here and there, really um, thought about using food in this creative a way. So I love it, and I just thank you so much for opening this whole corner of the genre for folks to write about. So many friends on Facebook and other social media, they post these incredible images of food, and I thought, wow, gosh, what would it be like to maybe do a haiga,
Mhm.
not labeling the image as with something that describes or names the foods that are in it, but what else might that wonderful display of whatever it is, what else might that evoke? And that's something I haven't really explored yet, but I'm inspired to now because it, it food and writing about food touches deeply in so many different ways for us,
It
every
does.
person, right? And culturally and in every sense. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to explore and to also pair with some visuals
Yeah.
of something or some things, photos or original art, whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It was very early when in the pandemic when things were super locked down, and we couldn't go anywhere or do anything. I actually, anytime my partner made a really nice meal or made something special, I actually did a haibun about it.
fabulous. Yes,
And
yeah.
I don't think haibun is really my genre ultimately, so it sort of trailed off. But it was, especially since I couldn't, since I had nowhere to go. All my like big trips that year got canceled, and
Yeah.
everything. To just write about like the food I was eating and the very like the ways we were still able to, you know enjoy even just a really good like BLT.
Hmm.
When you could you could get bacon in the store after everything had been gutted for 2 weeks.
Exactly. I think
Yeah.
I missed my opportunity to write haiku about sourdough bread because everybody was making their own bread, you know, for the first, I don't know how long in the
Give
pandemic.
it a year, I'm sure you'll come
Yeah,
up with a new take on sourdough.
exactly, exactly. Oh my goodness.
Right. Well, thank you. I have loved this conversation, and I'm so excited that you are on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Allison. This has just been great.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for being one of my very first long distance podcast guests. I know I've gushed over this, but it was such a fun conversation for me. I'm going to keep this wrap up short and sweet because dinner is just about done. John and his sister are making some pizzas from scratch, and everything smells super delicious. So, just a reminder, August 30th is our community open mic bonus episode. You can record up to 2 haiku for that. Please send those by 11:59 p.m. Central Time on August 28th. And you can go to the show notes or the blog post to see those guidelines. Please do follow them. It makes everyone's life happier and easier. Our next regular episode comes September 6th, and that's Matt Defabau talking about some food-related tanrenga he wrote with Christina Chin. All right, that just about wraps it up. And remember, you can always buy the project a coffee. And if that's not in your budget, again, one of the best things you can do to support is share the episodes you like. It always means a lot to me when people take the time to send episodes to friends, share them on their social media, whatever it is. All right, and with that, I'm going to go enjoy some dinner. I know my dog is ready for me to get off the computer as well. So thank you for listening.